So, a lot of you were here last month when Jeremy was talking about courage and the ministry that they had back in the 80s, and coming up to when he realised that the message that God was speaking to him was to affirm people in who they were and not to try and cure people of being LGBT. After that happened, the people who had been part of the Courage ministry continued to meet up. I wasn't part of it at that time. And out of that came the meetings which are now called 223, which happened in London. I haven't been going to them very long.
How long have you been going?
2 years, possibly. Is it that long? Yes.
Yeah,
When was the second Oasis Open Church Conference? It was just after that.
2016.
Yeah, it was 2016, wasn't it? So yeah. So I haven't been going to them for that long, but they happen 5 times a year in London, and anybody's very welcome to come and have a church service and be in the safe space and go to the pub afterwards and have a chat. I got involved after coming to the Oasis Open Church Conference because I'd got to that point in my life where I realised that me being gay and out at church was possibly not going to end well, and I was looking for an escape route. So I thought I need to meet some other people and see if are there any other gay Christians in the world, because I didn't know any. And then I came to the Oasis conference and found that indeed there were. So Oasis possibly saved my bacon on that one. I found out about 223 and started going. Now, Diverse Church already existed. Sally Hitchener started that 4 years ago as a Facebook group. It was coming out of her student ministry at Brunel University and trying to bring together LGBT people in an online space just to provide community and support and make it possible for people to believe it's possible to accept themselves and to hold their faith together at the same time. You don't have to give up on your faith and you don't have to give up on your identity. You can do both. Is that fair? DC veteran over there. Diverse Church Plus, which is the bit that I'm involved with, came about because the original Diverse Church was for 18 to 30s. Obviously, I'm a fair bit older than that.
Are you?
And yeah, funny that.
You wouldn't have guessed.
No, never, not in a million years. So I went up to Sally and said, okay, what's left for over 30s? And she said, well, there isn't anything, but we're thinking of starting something. So we thought there's a need for, to be honest, if we're in London, if you're within reach of Oasis and places like that, there are places you can go to and know you're loved by God and talk about your identity and work things out in a reasonable space. But if you're outside London, there's nothing. In a lot of places, there's lots of people who are out in the middle of nowhere and are in the place I was in 2 years ago of thinking I'm the only person in the world and there's nobody else like me. And Facebook is great because if you're in the Highlands of Scotland or the middle of the Lake District or the darkest depths of Wales or wherever else, as long as you've got a degree of broadband at least some point in the week, you can join Facebook and be part of a community, and you don't have to be in a big metropolitan area. So that was what happened basically. We've started Diverse Church Plus. Some of you are in it. I couldn't possibly say who because it's confidential. But yeah, that's grown to a community of about 250 now. And yeah, that's that really.
Thank you very much for that. Right, that's a bit about what you're involved in. What we want to find out this evening really is more about you as a person. You mentioned earlier on I know we joked about it, about hiding behind the piano. But sometimes that is true, isn't it? That we do hide behind things. Did you find did you grow up in the church?
Oh, I did, yes.
And how did you hide?
Well, the sort of church I grew up in, my grandfather was a pastor in South Wales, in the sort of culture where my friend's family weren't allowed to knit on Sundays. I think we were allowed to knit, but certainly you weren't really allowed to play cards or go to the cinema or anything like that. The Northern Irish are nodding in recognition. So it was quite a strict culture, and we were quite radical because we would be allowed to do some things on Sundays that my grandmother would frown at, but not if she was visiting. But there were brilliant things about that culture as well, because I'm sitting in church at 5 years old learning songs about daring to be a Daniel and daring to stand alone against injustice and evil and all the rest of it. And sometimes people say, how can you have left behind the faith that you used to have? I did not leave it behind. That faith is what made me who I am. That's the faith that said you need to stand up against injustice. It's okay to be the only person in the crowd who believes and says this thing. If that's what God is saying to you, you hold on to what God is saying to you and you keep it, because that's the thing that's going to change the world. So yes, when I was 12, I was going to be a missionary. absolutely, definitely. I didn't know where or anything like that. So I just knew I was going to be a missionary because that's what the really good Christians did. And then, what was the question again? I've lost it now. About hiding. The hiding was an interesting one for me because I'm a bit slow on the uptake when it comes to emotional stuff because I'm autistic as well, and that kind of makes it. Girl autistics tend to be a bit different to boy autistics. Boy autistics tend to collect batteries and get very obsessed about particular things, and there's all the stereotypes. But girl autistics tend more to do a lot of watch and copy. So the behaviours might be a bit less obvious. You might not see so many eccentric habits and things like that. But there's a lot of, you don't get the emotional things first time. You have to watch to see what everybody else is doing and then work it out and see if you can fit in. So girl autistics tend to be more obsessed about horses or maybe music or something like that. You still have your complete focus interests, but we try and make it a little bit more socially acceptable. I don't quite know why. Maybe somebody can research that one day.
It's been done.
I'm sure it has.
Yeah.
So for that reason, a lot of girls don't get diagnosed with autism because we try and blend. So actually, my big hiding thing wasn't anything to do with sexuality. It was to do with trying to work out how to have relationships and trying to work out how to fit in and trying to copy what everybody else was doing in Christian world to be the best Christian person I could, and in school to be the best student I could, and just trying to work out how the world worked and if I could make myself fit in it. At my home, that was fun because most of my mum's friends while I was a teenager were gay. So I've got all these wonderful lesbian women coming around the house, and I'm like, hey, this is a community I find really easy to fit in with. Why is that? But because I'm a bit slow, I didn't quite twig that that's because I was too. But I still remember the moment when I realised that the theology I'd been brought up with about gay relationships was wrong. Because I was sitting in the front room talking to my mum's friend and trying to convert her, because what do you do when you're 13? You know what I mean? You're like, I'm going to be the best Christian. I'm going to bring these people to the Lord. So I'm there, quoting Leviticus at her. And she's like, he's serious. And I remember the dawning realisation of, that's not what she's like at all, is it? And that moment of just looking at that person in front of me, who I really liked, we got on well, we were friends, and realising that all the theology I've been told didn't fit at all. And thinking, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to put that to the back of my mind because I can't not fit in the church environment. And then probably the next couple of decades really were me working out how I could make that instinct that I knew in my heart, and I knew it from being a very young teenager, what the truth was, but integrating that into a way that I could make it work with the church environment. Not with God. I never had a problem with God, but making it work with church.
It's funny, isn't it, how when we turn to God, without the church and without all the baggage, He kind of shows us how He accepts us.
Yeah.
But as soon as we get involved in the church, I hate saying that, suddenly that baggage we've taken on. Yeah. So how did you take that baggage off? How did you unpack it, if you like?
It probably, I said for me, it was masked by the dealing with the autism stuff, because I found it very difficult to accept myself because I couldn't deal with social situations, and I would have meltdowns and not be able to cope with things, and never very publicly. Probably most people who know me would just think I was a bit weird. They wouldn't, put a label on it. But it took me a really long time to get to the point of realising that God actually made me quite cool. Which, I don't want to, showing off or anything like that. But, God gave me a pretty good degree of intelligence. He gave me the ability to manage things. He gave me the ability to, I can't always feel the emotional stuff, but I can see what's going on and analyse it and make it work most of the time. And the gifts that being autistic give you of being able to look at things from the outside and being able to see things differently to other people, actually that is a gift from God. And it took me a long time to get to that point, but once I got to that point, actually the being gay stuff was like, oh, that as well, okay, that's part of the package. God's made me for a purpose, God's made me for a reason, God's made me with gifts and talents that I can give to the world, God's made me worthy of love and able to love other people. And okay, right, I love women, great, okay, that's fine. But by the time I knew God loved me so much in the depths of myself by that point, then it wasn't a huge fall apart moment. It was a bit, okay, that's going to be fun at church. But that was all.
You mentioned about loving people, and some of the things I've heard about you, from 223 in DC, and what I've seen as well is your passion for people. You have a real passion for them.
Yeah.
And you seem to have a passion, well, passion's the wrong word, but you hate seeing injustice.
Oh yeah.
How did you come to that way of thinking?
That's my mother's fault. That is totally my mother's fault, because she was, again, she's exactly the same. She can't see somebody who is hurt or in trouble without helping them. And that was just the way I was brought up, that if you see something that's wrong in the world, you try and fix it.
And how did that affect you as a young person that was beginning to realise that you're a lesbian? And you were in the church that taught the opposite to what you felt God was telling you. How did you cope with that? It
was a big conflict. I mean, you know, probably back when I was a teenager again and beginning to be aware of things, the bigger issue at that time in the church was women in leadership, because in very evangelical, you remember, if you were around at the time, you remember. If some of you may still be there, blessings upon you. But women in leadership was the huge thing. So I mean, like, I wrote my A-level dissertation on why you should use gender inclusive language in church, and you know, I was
before your time.
I was on the cutting edge, you know. Well, to be fair, my mother was on the cutting edge, and I stole her books. But that's the environment I grew up in, and that was my mum's campaign, was, you know, to have women included in church leadership and be acknowledged as equal children of God. And so that was where I started off. But then it was a big conflict between the feeling inside me that I knew what God was saying about including gay people. For example, like when I was at university, we had the mission, you know, the CU mission, where you get some evangelical to come in and shout at people and tell them they're all sinners. So guess who's the one who is calling up the LGBT society and saying, should we have a debate? And actually found myself kind of more on the side of the LGBT society than some of the CU. But it was great, because I really, even in that time, wanted to reach out to people and say, this is for everybody. This isn't just for, you know, the CU types. This is for all the people. And I couldn't quite square it, because then people were like, oh, but we can't have them in here, you know, sinners. And I couldn't work out how to make it work and how to get my voice heard. And I just sat with the tension for a really long time. And sometimes I beat myself up about that and think, no, I should have been a stronger ally sooner, because even when I wasn't sure I was gay myself or not, I knew what I thought about it, I knew what I believed about it, and I was too scared to stand up for it. But on the other hand, there's times and places. You know, I think if I'd made a big scene about it 50 years ago, I would just have left church. And that would have had other knock-ons.
That
would
50
have been
years ago?
No, not 50. That's you, darling.
Oh, right.
But yes, I think I would have just have left church. And at that time, I needed a community, and I needed people around me to help me be a person. And probably in the long run, I think God knew what he was doing.
So what made you, or when did you realise that, yes, I am a lesbian?
My late 20s, early 30s. I started, I think because at that point I'd had therapy. Therapy's great, you should have some. But I'd come to terms with myself, I'd accepted myself who I was, I'd relaxed about how I've just accepted myself and not stressing about everything. And then I think was able to actually start having proper relationships without having a stress out, and just, not that I had particular girlfriends at that time, but just being able to relax and feel and acknowledge your feelings, and not do the whole evangelical thing of, you know, pretending feelings are evil and you have to deal with them in some way, but accepting them as part of the person God's made you to be, and thinking, oh right, that's what they do, is it? And then I look back through my life and think how I felt about different film stars or TV people or people I've met and go, how did you not notice? I won't share the moments because many in the room will not appreciate them. But
you never know.
Titanic, yeah.
So who did you have a crush on? Who was your first TV crush then?
Oh, Kate Winslet, Titanic, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. It's okay, you don't have to appreciate it.
So did you have a coming out or not?
It was complicated. I was quite happy with who I was myself. I had certain close friends at the time who people were basically gossiping about us at church, and it was tricky because if I came out, it would make people assume things about them that weren't actually the case, but would put them in a tricky position. So I stayed in the closet longer than I really needed to, which is kind of good, because by the time I did come out, I was like, yes! And I was so ready for it, and I was really secure about it, and, you know, I wasn't about to get knocked over by anything anymore. But it did keep me in the closet longer than I really needed to be.
And what about your family?
Oh, they're great. We're kind of 50-50 gay in our family anyway, so...
So no problem there at all then?
You can't swing a handbag at a family function without knocking a gay over somewhere. Shout out to all my cousins.
You know, if you look at the church, you know, given all the horrible rhetoric that people here receive, and you yourself have received from the church, why? Why are you still a Christian? Why do you still believe?
Because Jesus is awesome. I think, you know, typical overthinking, but, you know, I can go around the houses and say, you know, my brother will say that it's all just me and my invisible friend and I'm kidding myself and all the rest of it. But I know that when I live as though what God says is true, my life is better. And I'm proud of who I am as a person, and I'm happy with the way I live my life, and I'm happy with the way I treat other people, and I'm happy with the values that I live by. And if God is an invisible friend, he's a pretty good one, because there's obviously some amazing thing in my brain that works when I treat God as though he's my invisible friend, because I just know things and work things out in a way that I don't when I don't talk to God about it. So if that's the way it works, it's great. But I just think Jesus is incredible, and the way he treats people is incredible, and the inclusion and the joy and the peace and the freedom that believing in him brings is worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I want you to go back. I don't know how old you are, so I'm not going to say go back 20 years or 30 years or whatever. I want to go back to when you were 15, 16, doing it. Was it GCEs or GCSEs?
GCSEs, darling, I'm not that old.
Right. You're getting a bit, right, I can now work out how old she is.
You've got a maximum anyway.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So when you were doing your GCSEs, so you were sitting down, doing your revision. Here you are now. What would you say to that person? And it's a normal question. What would you say to that person?
It's going to be okay. Because I was really feeling on my own at that point in my life. I mean, who doesn't when they're 15, 16? Everybody's in angst when they're 16, aren't they? But I really didn't know if it was going to be okay. But stick with it and trust yourself, because actually who God made you to be is good, and your instincts are good, and what you want to do is right, and it will all work out. Because I was kind of terrified that it wouldn't, that I would, you know, go crashing into hell because I made a wrong decision about something. I didn't know what the grace of God was like. You know, it's when you see it from the other side, and, you know, you watch a parent with a little child, and of course they fall over all the time. That's what kids do. But you don't love them any less for it. And you don't give up on them because they fell over the first time they walked. You know, you just keep sticking with it and pick them up and hold their hand, and they keep going with it, and eventually they learn to walk, and then they learn to read, and then they learn to design rockets, and, you know, all the things that people do in life. And God's just like that with us. And I had no idea. I thought God was waiting to splat me or to smite me or to cross me off the good list. And he's not. He's just, you know, okay, you fell over. Come on, let's do it again. And if I'd known that when I was 16, I would have been a lot less worried about my life. Just being able to trust in God to just be there, and like when I mess it up, which I will, and that's okay. It's part of the thing. It's part of growing and learning and becoming a person. And God will pick you up and keep walking with you. It's fine.
If God was going to speak to you now, all right, what do you think she or he would say?
Probably the same thing. Because you still worry about it, don't you? Wish God would speak to me now. I'd quite like some really specific direction right now with what to do with my life. But I think it is just the same thing. It's just, you know, keep trusting your instincts and doing the thing you think is best, and it will work out.
Finally, what would you like to say to people here that may be going through it, going through isolation, going through rejection, lack of self-esteem? Most people may be okay.
Yeah.
But maybe people that have lost their faith in a God or in Jesus.
I think the thing that held me back for the longest was not being scared to talk to God about my identity. I had that moment of being 13 and sitting in the front room and realising that what I'd been told was wrong. And it then took me probably really another 20 years before I took the conversation up again. And that's the thing I probably regret the most, because I lost that intimacy with God in that time. Because there was an area of my life that I had in a little box in the back of my mind that I wasn't talking to him about. And I wish I'd known sooner that I could just take it to God and say, there's this thing, I've no idea what to do with it. I don't know if that makes me not a Christian or whatever, but can we talk about it? And if I'd done that sooner, I might not have come out sooner because the situation wouldn't necessarily have been right, but I'd have been at peace with myself and I'd have not been worried about it, and I'd have been closer to God, and that would have been better. So I'd just say, don't be afraid to come to God, because you have no idea how much he loves you, and whatever questions or identity stuff is going through your head, it'll be okay. You'll work it out. That's that really. Yes, I did. I mean, I think most teenagers have to go through the stage where you go from that very childlike faith where you just accept what your parents told you to the stage where you own your faith for yourself. That's a normal part of spiritual human development. But I think that was probably that I did have this two-track thing where I kind of froze theologically, in that I didn't know what to do with the gay question, or to be honest, most of the Old Testament, or a whole load of other stuff, and I didn't process that. But actually, the music side of me and the worship side of me meant that I could carry on having quite a close relationship with God, even though I had these things on hold. So it was wasn't the most healthy of things, because I had one half of me that was relating to God really fluently and really easily because of the no words thing, because it is just your spirit communing with God's spirit, isn't it, when you worship, whether you're playing or whether you're singing or listening to a CD or whatever. You just have that meeting time with God that you don't have to have words for. It's like being with somebody who's just your best friend, and you can just exchange glances across the room and you don't have to say anything, and you've just got that closeness and that intimacy. As long as I didn't think about it too hard, and there were times that I was putting things on hold and not thinking about them. But in the end, the two came together, and that's the best thing since coming out and really addressing stuff and doing the learning and doing the hard work of getting my head around the Bible, is now I feel like I'm properly integrated and all the bits match. And actually, it means the worship leading's better now, because the worship leading before was kind of half blocked, because I was working off this half blocked channel where a bit of it was working and a bit of it was clunky, and it just was a bit meh. But now I'm out and I'm honest and I'm authentic about who I am, and everybody knows, and I'm not covering up. Like, the worshiping gets better and better.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think God respects honesty and God respects authenticity, and also God respects risk taking. And when you put something out there and say, okay, God, this is blooming terrifying, but I'm going to see what you do with it, God blesses that, even if you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because God's good. Ooh, this is the question of the moment. Up until 2 months ago, yes, I led very regularly in my church. Up until 2 months ago, yes, I led very regularly in my church. And now they've had an attack of the fundamentalists, and I'm currently not leading regularly in my church. I'm not going to be mean to my church leaders, because they're genuinely trying to do the right thing, and they're genuinely quite cut up about it. They just need to be a little bit more cut up about it and actually make a proper decision. But being part of Diverse Church in 223 means that I can't pretend. I think they would be quite happy for me to carry on leading worship if I could just keep my mouth shut and not say anything to anybody about being gay. But when I'm doing things in public and it's all over Facebook, then I can't really cover it up. And the trouble is, they love it when I lead worship, and they can see that God's doing something in it, and it's great, but they can't quite reconcile the public image of that and how people will react to them if they're seen to be allowing me to do it while being publicly gay. So that's the thing that they are struggling with.
Philip.
They're struggling with my sexuality. I'm not. What it needs to look like, because guys, we've got a world out there of people who really need God. You've got a world of people who are struggling with poverty and struggling with war and struggling with sickness. We've got racial inequality that needs addressing. We've got transphobia that needs hitting on the head. We've got structural inequality in our society that is completely against what Jesus is all about. And we're sitting here arguing about stuff that doesn't matter. And I think in the church, whichever church, Church of England, the church in England, the church worldwide, we disagree about everything. And I lived in Egypt for 2 years. I did my master's there. I went to a church in south of Cairo, which there's only 2 international churches in Cairo. So if you're a Christian and you're an expat, you're an Egyptian and you want to go to an international church, you have to go to that church. So in that church, you have people from every denomination under the sun. You've got your Southern Baptists, you've got your Episcopalians, you've got your Church of England, you've got your Baptists, you've got your African denominations, you've got everybody piled into one building. And what you see in that situation is that people who in their home country would have come to blows over the colour of the communion cloth, because they're in a situation where it's the only place you can go to worship Jesus, they join together. As like, we're here to worship Jesus because our primary identity is loving Jesus and blessing the community we live in. And we need to get a bit of that, frankly. We disagree about everything. We disagree about the atonement. We disagree about baptism. We disagree about the Holy Spirit. We disagree about whether you should sell weapons to Israel. We disagree about abortion. It needs to be added, the whole gay thing needs to be added to the list of things that we disagree about, but we serve the community anyway, because there's a bigger call in our lives. Yeah. Sorry.
Preach it, sister.
Hallelujah. Do I hear an amen?
The answer may be in the long term, I don't know. The thing is, I'm not the only person. The reason I came out to my church leaders 4 years ago or something now was that I knew I was not the only person, but I knew I was probably the safest person to deal with the crap. And I thought, there's people in our church who are gay or who are bisexual who aren't out, who can't tell anybody. And if they come out, then the reaction is likely to crush them so that they leave the church because they're not strong enough in their faith. And there's other people who might walk into church and introduce themselves as LGBT people, and then the reaction will push them away from Jesus so they can't even get there. So my whole thing was, if this is going to happen, if we're going to have a negative reaction, I want to be the lightning conductor for that, because I know this is not going to stop my relationship with God. You know, whether I stay or whether I go, in the end, I'll be okay. So I wanted to kind of to draw the attention and get the discussion to happen, because I knew that I wouldn't be permanently damaged by it. I'm still in the process of working out, now they're making decisions, how safe it is to stay there, but there's other people involved. Yeah. And, you know, the thing is, if I can be in a church and, you know, anybody who knows me knows I love Jesus, they know that God's anointed me to do things, they know I'm passionate about the Bible and about having an interpretation of the Bible that brings life and doesn't crush people. You know, anybody who's been in my church knows that. And they have to then square that with the fact they know I'm gay. And that's frankly their problem. But as long as I'm there, I provoke that argument and that conversation. If I leave and walk out the door, then the other people in the church who aren't out yet have to cope, and there's nobody there to advocate for them. So I'm kind of trying to strike the balance at the moment of being a thorn in everybody's side and keeping the focus on me rather than on them to keep them safe. And I don't know why there's such a large proportion of LGBT people who are autistic or Asperger's, but there's an awful lot of us. Yep. Well, stop saying turn around and talk to the person next to you in every meeting for a start. I think it's providing a space that allows for questioning as well. I think one of the brilliant characteristics of autistic and Asperger's people is that we don't take crap. We don't accept cover-up arguments for things. We want to know how things are. We want to know the truth of it. We don't play silly emotional games. And really the church spends a lot of time playing silly emotional games and trying to cover up truth and pretend it's not really how it is. And we're like, no, that is, God just told them to commit genocide. That's not, like, either I'm not worshipping God, or there's got to be a way of interpreting that actually works. So that's our gift to the church, because we'll cut through to the point and be quite annoyingly blunt about it. But also the church doesn't always allow for that very well. Does that make sense? Yeah. And the relational side can all be a bit tricky as well, can't it? Especially in your charismatic, huggy-feely churches.
That's why it's important to ask,
yes.
Are you a hugger or not?
Yes. Or, can I give you a hug? Because
yes.
I am a hugger with the right people. I can get very tense if I don't trust a person or I don't know a person and they're like, oh, you're in my space, go away. But being able to talk honestly about emotions and like, is this okay for you? And just being upfront about things, I think, is really helpful. Completely exponentially increased. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Everything that was there before. Like Nick was saying on Saturday, if you're at 223, you know, when they became inclusive, everything the Holy Spirit was doing before, the Holy Spirit did more afterwards. And that's been absolutely true. Then people who didn't know have been came up to me and said, "What's changed?" Because it was just different.
There's no hiding.
No, exactly. There's no hiding.
Yeah.
And people can tell that, I think.
I think it's difficult for LGBT people of faith because they have to come out twice. Twice, you know, once to the church, and then once to the gays and the LGBT community. I'm a Christian or a person of faith.
Which is far worse.
Have you found that?
It is tricky because people have a certain view. I think I'm still trying to find ways of talking about my faith in ways that are authentic with my friends, because a lot of them don't have a frame of reference for talking about faith that doesn't involve people being incredibly mean. And I'm still working on creating that. Sometimes I do okay and sometimes I don't. But I think I'm a bit still in the closet on that one. Not that it's a secret, but just finding a way of talking about it that's meaningful to people. It doesn't sound like you're being super religious and trying to shove it down their throat.
So thank you very, very much for sharing. And God's love has no strings attached, as you've seen this evening. Carry on talking amongst yourselves.